First of all, thank you, first of all, for everybody allowing me to be a part of this group. You'll learn very shortly why nursing is extremely important to me. At the same time, given the opportunity to be able to speak with all you is, tremendous. Having been on the business side of things and also now being on academia side, being involved in the nonprofit side as well too. This is probably the largest group of officers I've been in front of in a long, long time. So it's great to be in front of all of you and have this opportunity. I'll give you this caveat, I will leave all of you with a ton of questions. As I was being offered the opportunity to speak, I told them, I said, a half hour is never enough because I always leave out something. There's always something that I don't describe very well, and trust me, I frustrate many in the business on your side of things in regards to healthcare when I don't explain everything, because they are like, well, why didn't they do this? So without further ado, in August 2005, my family and I relocated to Fort Wayne, Indiana for me taking my first teaching position, my first full-time teaching position. The good news is what came with that was the reality that my son needed his first school physical for first grade. We moved to Fort Wayne, obviously changed doctors, and as luck would have it, we stumbled upon a pediatrician that apparently finds something wrong. As he's listening to my son's heart, he starts to realize there's something different here. And he starts to do something that caught us off guard. He starts to take his pulse on both sides, and then he starts to take a blood pressure on all four of his extremities. And of course my wife's like, listen, I've been to more than enough doctor's appointments that no one's ever done this before. What's going on? And he's like, well, I'm starting to hear something. Lo and behold, after a whirlwind of tests, my son was diagnosed with a coarctation of his aorta. The good news is that he had no external issues. He had nothing that was showing to us signs that this was an urgent issue. He was very actively involved in sports. He swam all summer. He played flag football, baseball, soccer. It seemed like we didn't have enough for him to do apparently, but at the same time, the doctor said, don't worry, we'll schedule this out. We scheduled his surgery to remove the coarctation 4 months later. Surgery was very successful. The doctor even came out, and this will show the real consumer side of me. The doctor came out with a little jar and showed me the actual coarctation in the jar and said, this is what was inside of your son, and showed me the pinhole that was available in regards to the blood flow going through his aorta. And he said, that's where the blood was going through, and you can realize, why this needed to be removed. And of course, the goofy side of me said, can I keep this? I'm like, I need to show my son Christian what this is and that this came out of him. And he's like, yeah, I think I'll get in a little bit of trouble if I don't show that I took this out and recorded it somewhere, that we actually file it. And I thought, all right. I said, well, I just figured I'd try because I thought my son would really enjoy seeing that. So surgery went well. The day after surgery, things unfortunately did go wrong. My son was awake the next morning. He was talking, he was eating ice chips, he was conversing with us. He was telling us about the fact that his side hurt. They went in through under his armpit in order to do the coarctation. And, so we were having some good conversations. And, from our standpoint, we thought everything was good. My son fell asleep around 9:30 in the morning. The only reason some of these times and specific times stick out in my mind is because things were happening at the time. My father had come down for the surgery and then stayed the night. He noticed my son Christian was getting tired, and he said, listen, I'm going to go back to Chicago. I'm going to take off. He looks like he's tired. We'll see you guys for the holiday. And we're like, great. So my father left. My son fell asleep. The reality is my son unfortunately never woke up again. Following the coarctation and afterwards, we obviously learned a lot more about the things that were going on with my son throughout the day, and things that they were addressing that are normal post-surgery, like low sodium. He was prescribed to have some IVs to restore the sodium and bring it back up. Unfortunately, someone also ordered Lasix at the same time. So we realized at the time, we realized afterwards that this probably played somewhat of a role. Throughout the day, we had asked questions of the nurse because he was sleeping very soundly. Could not be woken up. And we were told consistently that this was normal. And things happened throughout the day where I obviously questioned it in terms of the normalcy. It got to a point where I think I was probably at least at like the third question of me asking if it was normal, and the nurse assured me, and then my wife reassured the nurse. And at this point, I'm obviously feeling like the extremely overprotective father. So I at that point stopped in regards to asking my questions. Later in the afternoon, my son started to make some movements that the nurse described in her notes as actually described as being fidgety. And when my wife and I read the notes, we obviously differed, because we're like, that's not what someone looks like when they're fidgety. They were seizures. And when we described during a root cause analysis meeting with the doctors, when we described the movements and showed them the movements and told them about what we were watching at the time the movements were about to occur, and that they seemed very rhythmic at the time. The doctors all said those were seizures. Those seizures were occurring approximately around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they have stopped around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Nobody reacted to my son in regards to his state until 7 p.m. And by that point, the floor ICU doctor had come down to evaluate my son, because at this point we had nurses in the room, nurse managers in the room, we had residents in the room, and we had everybody going, we don't understand what's not responding here. And the most unfortunate thing was no one was putting their hands on my son until the ICU floor manager doctor walked in around 7 p.m. and he started to do reflex tests. And when he started doing that, that was when I went, there's something incredibly wrong, because my son wasn't reacting to any of them. And at that point, the rapid response team was called in, they intubated my son, they went for tests, his brain had herniated. It had swollen to a point. And unfortunately, they did do surgery, and I always forget the term, I have to apologize, to lessen the pressure on the brain. They drilled into his skull. They told me exactly what to watch for and hope for, and unfortunately none of it happened. 3 days later, my son was declared brain dead. We pulled him off of life support. Obviously, it's a very difficult circumstance for us. The reality for ourselves, having gone through a lot of questioning, the first question that arose was when I received the death summary, and I read the death summary, and I noticed that the time frame on the death summary went with notes related to 11 a.m. and then 5 p.m. And I called the surgeon, and I said, who wrote the death summary? And he was like, well, what do you mean, who wrote the death summary? And I said, who put this together? And he said, well, I did. And I said, well, where'd you get the information from to put this in? Because I said, you weren't in there, so I know you wrote this from something. We took this from the nursing notes. And I said, how come there's nothing in here from 11 o'clock to 5 o'clock? Because there were things occurring throughout the day. And he was like, what do you mean? I said, my son fell asleep at 9:30 and never woke up again. I said, the only time my son could have woken up was during lunchtime, when we said to the nurse, is it okay if my wife and I go to lunch? We'll come back after lunch. And the nurse said, sure. I said, so the only time my son could have woken up was during lunch when my wife and I weren't there. I said, so how come that's not in the notes that my son hadn't woken up since 9:30? The more him and I started to talk, the more that we got more involved in the root cause analysis, we realized